Happy Thursday, Team Red Tigers. Welcome to ELA. Today we're going to do two big things. We're going to add one sentence of dialogue, at least, to our personal narratives. And we're going to do that to demonstrate we remember the punctuation rules from dialogue. Then we're going to edit based on skills that you bring with you from 5th grade. Things like capitalizing names. You're then going to have a chance for a partner to read it over, see if you missed any editing errors or not, confirm that you're good to go. And finally today, we're hoping that you have a chance to add your ideas for our personal narrative rubric to the anchor chart on the wall. Today we're going to ask that you pause the video when we have you do certain activities. So first, we're going to look at how do we punctuate dialogue, quotation marks, commas. Then we're going to have you pause and figure out somewhere in your personal narrative to add that. Then we're going to ask you to come back. So please keep an ear out for those really important reminders to pause. We'll also have a visual, but I figured I'd let you know in advance. Let's practice that real quick. Go ahead, find the pause button, pause, and snap your fingers 3 times. Excellent work, party people. Now let's get to it. Now that we've been snapping, let's pause and take a minute to look here. Take a deep breath. I know the minute I mentioned punctuation, some of you were like, no, thank you, Miss O'Sullivan. I'm good. So let's remind ourselves that we're going to keep calm and punctuate properly, the best that we can. Please remember that in this unit, this little mini unit this week, it's our first time getting to know you as a writer. So we're really just leaning into things that you already know. Keep calm. We'll get through it. We want to talk about adding dialogue. So someone speaking out loud or saying something out loud. That adds an immediate sensory detail to your writing. Because if you're repeating or recreating the moment where you heard something, your reader is going to be able to have that same experience. So we want you to pause here and figure out, where can I add dialogue? Where does it make sense for me to have someone saying something out loud? This is our first official pause. And as a reminder, right now, we are paused and looking for somewhere to add dialogue in our writing. Now that you've selected where you're going to write your sentence, and I'm going to guess that most of you went ahead and wrote it. If not, you can now, or when we pause next, which I promise is really soon, so don't go scribbling while I'm giving directions, because I know. Okay, so there are about 6 really important rules when it comes to quotation marks, and I only broke them down because I wanted you to be able to use them like a checklist. So take a minute, glance through these, and let's dive in. Rule 1. If someone is speaking out loud, you need quotation marks. The difference between an inner thought and an outer thought, something you could hear out loud, is the quotation marks. So that's our first rule. Rule 1, someone's going to speak, there's going to be quotation marks around it. Take a look at these examples. The first one doesn't need it. It was paraphrased, it's not the exact words. The second example is exactly what I said. So rule 1, if it's being said out loud and it's exactly what the person said, we got to have quotation marks around it. If we paraphrase it, if we put it into our own words, or it's internal dialogue, what I'm thinking, you don't need quotation marks. Rule 2, we got to capitalize the first word inside the quotation mark, just like the beginning of a sentence. So anytime you're starting a sentence, you're going to have a capital letter. So if you look here, Mr. Jones cried, "That bridge isn't strong enough." "Of course you can," Miss Smith whispered. It gets a little complicated with these two examples, and this is where people get caught up. So make sure you take a really close look at these and you access this resource, meaning you click on it, and use it as you're editing your personal narrative today. Rule 3, you're going to put a comma right before you introduce the dialogue or textual evidence. So in his essay, Dr. Jose Ortiz says, comma. Rule 4, punctuation marks are going to go inside your quotation marks. So whatever I say, hello, is going to get a quotation mark after it. Hello, exclamation point, quotation mark. Take a quick look at this. I know this is a skill you've been taught before, so you see me not spending a ton of time on each of these. Remember, we want you to go back and click on this resource so you can use it to help edit. Rule 5. This is a little more complicated and you can pretty much ignore it unless you have someone like speaking for paragraphs. This is about ellipses, and I wanted to put it out there because you never know if you want to challenge yourself. So let's say in your story, your mom gave a 45-minute lecture, but you're not actually going to type out your mom's whole 45-minute lecture. So instead, you're going to put quotation marks and say, "And Maureen, I never ... And that's why you're grounded until you're 85. Period. End quotation marks," said my mother. That's what you're going to do instead of typing out something really, really long that maybe we don't even know. Rule 6. If you have people speaking, you need a new paragraph every time the speaker switches. This is a conversation between 3 teachers. And every time the speaker switches, we have a new paragraph. In this paragraph, I am speaking, Miss O'Sullivan. "Catwoman is clearly a better character than Batman," Miss O'Sullivan said to Mr. Palmgren for the 100th time. Then Mr. Palmgren's going to reply, so we have a new paragraph here. Mr. Palmgren responded huffily, "You could not be more wrong." If you know Mr. Palmgren, he doesn't really talk like that, but I like it better this way. Then a new paragraph, and Mr. Kaplan's now going to come in and say, "What are you talking about?" Mr. Kaplan interrupted, "Because I agree with Miss O'Sullivan." Because of course. So every time you have a new speaker, you need a new paragraph. And that could end up being a lot if you're having a long conversation, and that's okay. So a quick reminder of today's first goal. Let's go ahead and make sure that we use those punctuations correctly for our dialogue. Go ahead and pause the video here. This is our second pause of the video, and we're pausing here to go and check our punctuation for our dialogue. Don't forget, you can click on the resource, the same exact thing I'm using in the video, to look at examples and make sure yours is correct. The addition of dialogue was the last step in our revision process. So now we have pre-written, drafted, and finished revising. Boop, boop, boop. I also kind of tricked you a little bit, so I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. But looking at the punctuation of dialogue brought us right into our next step, which is editing. So we want to proofread and correct errors. That could be spelling errors and grammar errors. It's easiest if at this phase your personal narrative is typed. You might want to use the pause time here to type, or you might want to do what you can and then type later today, possibly for homework. No more than 20 minutes. In order to move on to this step and edit your flash draft, you're going to go ahead and click this link that says Editing Checklist. We went ahead and put together editing skills that you have as incoming sixth graders, and that's all we're going to hold you accountable for. Things you already know. We think that's the most fair. So now that you've looked at your narrative, we're going to go ahead and start to figure out what skills do we need to check for. So you clicked the link, you made it here. You're going to put your first and last name, your class period. Then we're going to start to edit for specific things. 6 specific things. First, is it broken into 3 paragraphs? Yes? Or maybe you still have questions about this you want us to work with you on. We want to know. Don't just say yes because you think that's what we want to hear. Go ahead and tell us if, I kind of have a question about that skill. Because again, we'd like to grade you on things you already know for this. And if you don't know it, we would like to help you learn it so you can move forward and grow. 2, I capitalized first word in my sentence correctly. Holidays, proper nouns. Yes, or you have questions. I use correct punctuation at the end of my sentences. Yes, or questions. If you included dialogue, you had to. You used punctuation marks and commas correctly. Yes, or I have a question. And then 5 and 6 are really, we want to kind of see where you are on these and what you remember. So I corrected sentence fragments, incomplete thoughts, and run-on sentence, too many thoughts together. And did you use, in number 6, adjectives to describe nouns and adverbs to describe verbs? We kind of want to know where everyone is on these things. So you're going to use this as your checklist. And these are the things we would like to make sure you've corrected before we turn this in tomorrow and celebrate. So we're going to go ahead and pause now so that you can read through the checklist, look over your narrative, correct any of these things that you don't see corrected, and fill out this Google form. Go ahead and pause here. We are currently paused to be using our editing checklist to correct errors when it comes to spelling, punctuation marks, and grammar. Things that we already knew from 5th grade. At this point, we've taken care of our 2 big checklist items for today, adding a piece of dialogue to our personal narrative and editing our personal narrative flash draft using our checklist. At this point, there are 2 more things we'd like you to do before ELA is over today. If you have some questions about your editing, we'd like you to ask a partner to read over your narrative to catch any errors you missed. Maybe you can swap with them. They could read yours, you could read theirs. Maybe some of you have tips and tricks about how to use spell check. Please go ahead and share them with each other. And finally, we're going to be turning in these stories to get graded tomorrow. And we want to know from you what you think is fair for a grade. Before we send you off to get a partner's opinion or write on the anchor chart, we wanted to remind you what a rubric is. So a rubric is basically a checklist that grades skills. So I kind of made a joke one up here. You can also see it in the classroom on the anchor chart. The skill is laughing. So the highest level would be here. So not only does the student laugh at Miss O'Sullivan's jokes, but adds their own humor to the class. Oh, typo, to the class. 3, the student laughs at Miss O'Sullivan's jokes. Okay, so the skill is there. but we could work on it. Not quite perfect, if we're grading it, maybe an A minus, B plus, as opposed to here where it would be an A plus. Now we'd be moving down. Okay, the student attempts to laugh at Miss O'Sullivan's joke. So there's some attempt made. The student does not attempt to laugh at Miss O'Sullivan's jokes. And 0 doesn't even go to ELA. That's how bad my jokes are. Now, obviously, this one is just an example, but I just want to remind you this is how rubrics work. So what we're asking you to add to the anchor chart is what skills do you think are fair to be on your rubric to grade you on this mini unit? We want your input. It's your learning. At the bottom here, we have an example of one of the categories that we think is fair. So pause here, take a look, and see what you think. Remember, we're pausing here to go ahead and look at this as a rubric skill that we think is fair for our personal narratives. We want your feedback on the anchor chart in the classroom. Please write your ideas before you leave today. If you have to go onto a second page of the anchor chart, that's great. I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday, Red Tigers.